Hi, this is Dr. Swanberg. We're talking today about bias and point of view, or point of view and bias, depending on how you look at it. It all depends on your point of view. Actually, we're going to start with point of view. This, for once, is exactly what it sounds like. Different people see the world in different ways, and we end up having different points of view. 3 different people retelling an event will all tell that event differently. People's experiences lead them to interpret things differently. A parent sees things from a different point of view than a child because they're coming at it from different points of view, different places in the world. Let's look at 2 really simple examples. A child thinks that leaving her bear at school is a tragedy worthy of copious amounts of tears, wailing, sleeplessness. The parent, who knows that bear is safe and sound and will reappear tomorrow morning, is not crying. Well, at least not until he's spent a sleepless night comforting his poor, irrational, screaming, crying child. That might reduce him to tears. A student comes to class and wonders why everyone is working silently and, worried that she's missing a quiz, asks, "What are we doing?" The teacher, on the other hand, knows that they're brainstorming topics for a paper, is worried that her students will be distracted by the late student, and asks the student to take a seat and wait quietly. So these 2 different places in the world, places in experience, points of view, mean that they react to a certain stimulus in 2 totally different ways. Really, point of view changes everything. Point of view not only changes how you see things, but what you do about them. Understanding someone else's point of view helps us have empathy and maybe treat somebody a little nicer because we've walked a mile in their shoes. That's a statement that asks you to understand someone else's point of view. Understanding someone else's point of view also helps us win arguments, to get what we want, to diffuse tense situations, and even to avoid danger because we can imagine what the other person is thinking. Understanding your boss's point of view is a job-saving skill. If something that doesn't matter to you at all really matters a lot to your boss, it's probably time to jump on that bandwagon. Look at it from her point of view. Understanding your patient's point of view is an essential to a good nurse, just as understanding your customer's point of view is essential to a good business management. So it's really important to be able to see things from different points of view and recognize that a different point of view might change how somebody's responding to you. In the novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau. I almost called it Dr. Moreau's Island. I'm tired. All right, in the novel, mostly we get the narrator's point of view, who thinks that the experiments in the island are grotesque and morally wrong. But in a few places, we get the point of view of Dr. Moreau himself. He doesn't think what he's doing is wrong at all. In fact, he thinks his research represents a crucial advancement in medical science. And my question is, what's your point of view? Are you like the narrator, or are you like Dr. Moreau himself? What do you think these experiments are going to teach us, and is it worth it? Okay, so what's your point of view in between those 2 things? All right, thinking about bias. Bias is something that's really based on point of view because coming from different points of view will give you a particular bias. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, bias is a particular tendency or inclination, especially one that prevents unprejudiced consideration of a question. In other words, you're in favor of something or you're against it, and it's hard for you to see it any other way. We tend to think of bias as an inappropriate thing because bias against people based on race or gender or religion is really ugly, and it's one of the bias in that respect is one of the things our country really struggles with. However, bias happens in all sorts of contexts, and it's important to recognize all of them, not just the ones that seem really dangerous or ugly. Let's look at some examples of everyday bias. The things that the Honda dealer tells you about a Honda are biased because he's selling Hondas. The thing a mom tells you about her kid's intelligence, totally biased. The things your teacher tells you about study skills are biased. They've got a teacher's bias behind them. The things your parents tell you about disciplining your son are biased by their own experiences. The things your doctor tells you about alternative medicine are biased. The review of the product you're thinking of buying on Amazon is biased. All right, talk about bias toward versus bias against. When we say something is biased toward something, that means they're in favor of it. They like it. She is biased toward her female students and praises them more than the boys. When we say someone is biased against something, that means they are not in favor of it and they do not like it. She is biased against her female students and criticizes them more than the boys. Notice in both of these, the word bias is added an ed to the end of it. When you're using it as a descriptor, he is biased, we use the ed. That's the participle form, and I can explain it to you grammatically in a live chat if you want me to. But just kind of use this screen here as a little bit of coaching in how to use the word bias in a sentence if you're writing about it. Okay? Let's look at specific biases. Sometimes we're called upon to assess what someone's bias is. So let's take a minute and look at the examples from the everyday biases and articulate what the biases might be. And there might be more than one. Okay? The things that the Honda dealer tells you about a Honda. He's got biases because he might be proud of the product. Maybe he's got to make a sales quota that's giving him a bias. Maybe he's a Honda owner himself because he gets a discount. In any way, shape, or form, he's got those biases created by a salesman. Okay? The thing a mom tells you about her kid's intelligence, she is the bias of a mom. She is biased by love and devotion. She's biased by her pride in her child. And she's biased because she has high hopes for that child's future. All of those things create a bias. The things your teacher tells you about study skills are biased because this is the person who probably likes school, who has had previous success using the study skills they're recommending. And they want you to succeed, so they're favoring things that they think have a lot of success. And it comes from a biased experience. The bias of the things that your parents tell you about disciplining your son, that comes from their previous experience, whether it was good or bad, and from the bias that they want your child to behave when they're around them. The thing your doctor tells you about alternative medicine are biased. If you ask your doctor about acupuncture, they're going to give you an answer that's biased by the fact that they studied Western medicine for 10 plus years, not Eastern medicine. They want you to be healthy, and they want to avoid lawsuits, so they're not going to tell you to do something experimental that they don't know about. Okay? The review of the product you're thinking of buying is biased. It doesn't mean it's wrong or it's bad. It just means that this person has a previous experience that has colored their perception. They either liked or hated the product, and they were either treated well or poorly by the seller, and those things are affecting how they're talking about the product. Point of view causes bias. Let's make no mistake about this. If you are a hardworking teacher, you might develop a bias against lazy students. It's really easy to do, I gotta tell you that. We get frustrated with students who don't work real hard. On the flip side, if you're a hardworking student, you're probably likely to have a bias against lazy teachers. We've all had one of those. When a teacher you don't think even reads what you turn in, it's frustrating when you do a lot of work and you don't think they're paying attention to it. If you're a soccer player, you might have a bias towards summer programs for your kids that feature soccer. If you're a Republican, you might have a bias against liberals. If you're a Democrat, you might have a bias against conservatives. If you're a Southerner, you might have a bias against Yankees. If you're a New York City dweller, you might have a bias toward public transportation. If you're a car manufacturer, you might have a bias against public transportation. So you can see that your point of view can cause you to have a bias, which is why these 2 points got merged into one lesson. So really, the things to remember are that bias is a particular tendency or inclination, especially one that prevents you from making a balanced decision. And point of view is simply seeing the world from different ways because you're coming from a different perspective. You're coming from a different angle. Different people are going to have different points of view and different biases. Everybody's got a bias because everybody has a different point of view. And that is the end of this lesson. If you need to watch it again, feel free to watch it as many times as you need to feel comfortable with the material.